Hi everyone, this is Active Arrow. Going to be doing a video series on my method of learning Japanese from a perspective I haven't seen too much of on YouTube. That's why I wanted to address this. And what I've seen a lot is people on YouTube, a lot of them are taking university courses or they have a lot of Japanese native exposure even in their home country. And I know there's a lot of us out there that don't have these things. And a lot of these people, they give really good advice for studying on your own, but I've never seen, I don't think I've seen too many videos from somebody that's just completely kind of by themselves. And so I'm kind of coming from that perspective. I know there's a lot of people out there, so I wanted to give my take on things. I've been studying Japanese for approximately 1 year, completely on my own. I've never taken a university course. I don't have lots of Japanese input from natives. I do have a Japanese friend, but we don't speak in Japanese because he's trying to get really good in English, and we don't see each other very much at all. Another thing is I work 40 hours a week, and I take 20 hours, I believe it or not, college credits as well. None of them are Japanese related. Like I said, never taken a Japanese course. So, oh, by the way, I only go to school for actually 8 hours. I do another 12 hours, like a directed study, so I'm not, completely insane. So anyway, so I know there's other people like that out there, and in this period of time, doing it part-time, I've reached a fairly decent level. I've reached roughly a JLPT3 level of grammar, comprehension, and with a much higher kanji, recognition and writing ability, which the JLPT doesn't test, but my kanji ability, writing recognition actually is at JLPT 1 level, I guess, in terms of writing, if there was such a thing, since it doesn't test writing. But so anyway, my main point of this video, and I'm going to do several others detailing certain tools, I guess that's what we'll call them, that I use for this method. But my main argument that I'd like to throw out there is this. It's called the input hypothesis for language learning. It's a pretty, I guess, opposite theory to the traditional way, at least in university type courses. And what this method states is that speaking should not be the focus of your learning, and instead input through listening and reading is vastly more important if you're really concerned about becoming extremely good at the language, not just reaching like a tourist level ability to a get by level. If you're really serious about becoming really good in a language and you don't have access to constant native correction, which is a lot of people out there I know are in a situation like me. So what this method basically states is, or the basic idea is that input also is just far more important. People think speaking, or people like to speak because that's an active thing that that sounds cool. Like it seems like you're learning something. When you come out of a class or you're in a class and the teacher asks you to say something and you say something correctly, you're like, yeah, I'm learning something. But actually your ability to speak is one of the least important, or your ability to output is the least important of the two major language skills, which is recognition and production, or input and production. Input is, of course, your ability to comprehend, your ability to understand what you hear and to understand what you read. And the reason is if you can't understand something, one, it doesn't matter how well you can speak because you're never going to understand the response. Two, a person gets far more input on a daily basis than they output. You're only one person, so you can only output so much, yet you're surrounded on a daily basis by the outputs of tons of other people, which is input to you. Every magazine article or book or news report or radio broadcast, all this is input to you. So you're exposed to far more input opportunities. It's far more important. The third reason is massive input creates comprehension, and comprehension is the only way for you to actively speak correctly. The reason is this is very simple, very logical, is you can only say something that you know. And you can only say something correctly and know it's correct if you know it's correct. I know it sounds stupid, But through comprehension, when you do start speaking, you'll know it's correct because you've heard it and you comprehend it. You've had so much exposure and so much input that you will know the right thing to say. So the general idea is when you start out with this method of getting lots of input and working on input first, is to actually not speak at all, is to purposely not speak. And the reasons for this is, one, you're a beginner and you suck. And people say, well, yeah, that's exactly the point. You want to get practice. But if you're by yourself, when you first start out, you're not used to these sounds, one. And you get used to them through lots of input. So if you start off before you're really used to and not really know how these sounds sound, you're going to be making sounds and you're going to be making mistakes. And you're not going to be knowing that they're mistakes because you don't have enough comprehension, because you haven't not had enough input to know that they're wrong. So every time you say something, every time you actively do something with anything, you're more likely to do that same thing again. So if you start out speaking, and this is what a lot of college classes do, which is for this theory, and this is linguistic research, as they've been proven that it seems to be correct, that in these college classes, when they have these kids speak, and they're all a bunch of new beginners, and it's just one teacher trying to converse with all these students, doing a little practice. Well, these students that are really bad because they're beginners get out and they'll practice speaking, but since they're beginners, they don't know what they're saying is, if what they're saying is correct or not. So they're speaking with other beginners, and anytime they make a mistake, they don't know they're making a mistake, so they're just reinforcing bad Japanese. And the result of this is what often happens, and people don't know it, is that people will get really good at really bad Japanese, yet they'll still be able to get by with it. And that's the problem, and that's the other problem with the lots of output, is because native speakers of almost any language are not going to sit around and correct you constantly. It just doesn't happen. If we're, especially people you don't know, if you're out in the real world, or take it from your point of view, I'm sure everybody's experienced non-native speakers that speak English or whatever your native language is poorly. You don't correct them every time. If you can understand that, if they can get the point across, even if their English is extremely bad, you don't stop and say, "Yep, should have used past tense there." That never happens. So what happens is, if you speak bad and reinforce all these bad habits, you can go out to the real world and you'll get by and think you're speaking good Japanese because you don't know, because you've learned all this stuff and you've gotten by and nobody's correcting you, or not correcting you as much as they should. So that's the general idea of this method, is that you first start off and you get massive amounts of input, and that's all you focus on to get tons and tons of comprehension. And through this comprehension, what happens is you start acquiring your language ability, how you somewhat acquire it naturally, which is how we all learn to speak. We basically were imitating from hearing as we grew up. We didn't know grammar rules. We didn't practice creating things. We essentially said the only thing we knew to say because it was the only thing we've heard. So that was what happens through this method. You'll start want to respond in Japanese, not because you're putting together really a sentence based on rules that you've learned. You're not experimenting. You'll say something because you know it, because you've already heard it. Maybe not the exact phrase. See, that's the point. It's not the exact phrase, but you've heard the sentence pattern, where at this point you can replace the vocabulary words at will because they're relatively unimportant. It's really the sentence structure and sentence pattern. When you've heard somebody say this general pattern, and you've heard this general response a ton, and so you start knowing that's the response. And the key is, and if you don't say it. And this is one of the problems the input method has with traditional language, is they have kids out there trying to create. And language, believe it or not, is not a creative process. The words and the sentence patterns that native speakers use, they're already there. Like, if you don't know, if you're having to try to create, you shouldn't be saying it because you don't know it enough. You shouldn't have to create. You should know. If you have enough comprehension, you will know. So my next couple of videos, I'm going to go into the method of systematically acquiring input, how to build up your input in a method you could actually set goals for. I think it's really important, and it's really daunting when you first start out with Japanese. It was for me, is I didn't know where to go, like where to set goals. I didn't know what I was doing right. So that's what my next videos are going to cover. So this is my video on the input method. I'd like to hear other people's opinions on this. It'd be really appreciated. Thank you very much.